almost all seated. Well, good evening. I've never had people listen to me so well, so thank you. Congratulations on that to start off the evening. My name is Dan Rowe, and I'm the mayor of Roseville, and I want to thank you all for being here tonight. It's such a kind of a beautiful spring-like evening. There's probably a lot of places we'd all rather be, but it's so nice to see a great turnout again for this fifth Imagine Roseville event. I just wanted to, as I said, welcome you all here. Thank you for being here, and give you a little bit of a recap as to sort of how we got here this evening, in case you maybe haven't been following the process to this point. This Imagine Roseville sort of concept began almost 2 years ago now, shortly after the Philando Castile shooting in Falcon Heights, and there was a group of folks in the community as well as community leaders who sort of came together in an ad hoc fashion and said, well, what can we as a community be doing in response to this? And so we sort of had several meetings and some planning sessions and decided to have a series of conversations as a community about a number of the issues that arise from that incident and other things that were certainly going on that summer, as you may recall. And so the first Imagine Roseville conversation was structured very loosely as an opportunity for people to sort of respond to what had happened and what was happening in other communities, and an opportunity to sort of get your feelings out and talk about where people are coming from and how people are responding to it personally. And then the second discussion we had a few months after that was an opportunity for people to come together and start saying, well, okay, now we've sort of had a chance to express our feelings and our frustrations and our emotions related to these events. Now let's start thinking about some things we can do going forward as a community to maybe make a positive difference. And so it was, for lack of a better word, maybe a brainstorming session where a number of issues and ideas and concepts were put together that could then be focused on in another series of conversations going forward. Coming out of that, I think the first issue that seemed to raise to the surface with the most attention at the time, and this was shortly after the 2016 election, was issues of immigration and local law enforcement and some of those intersections of values of wanting to be safe and law-abiding as well as wanting to be welcoming as a community. And so we had a couple of discussions in that regard, the outcome of which was a policy adoption by the city, well, actually first by the police department and then enforced by the city council adoption of the policy of not asking immigration status unless it's required for the particular law enforcement case at hand, so that we were expressing our policy in that regard because, as the chief and others will tell you, people are more willing to come forward and report crime or be witnesses to criminal activity and help the process if they're not afraid of being involved in immigration action as a result of it. And so that was one of the things that came to the surface in that brainstorming session. There were also discussions more broadly about sort of policing and race, and we did have a conversation, sort of a town hall a few months ago with the chief and Lieutenant Scheider at that time, and that was more of a broad-ranging discussion, follow-up on some of the previous discussions as well, but not necessarily specific to a particular topic. But one of the things that sort of through this whole conversation process had been coming up was statistics about traffic stops and arrests and things like that, and the demographics of the individuals who are involved and how that relates to the community that we are in. And so sort of somewhat coincidentally to our process, maybe not coincidentally, but concurrently with it, the Ramsey County dispatch folks and the law enforcement entities in Ramsey County put together a program where over the course of the last year in 2017, they did keep those types of statistics and compiled those, and those were released earlier this year, just after the first of the year. And so one of the objectives of this Imagine Roseville process was to have a conversation specific to those statistics, to report what they are, and to have an opportunity to talk about that as a community. And so that is the Imagine Roseville discussion that we're having this evening. And so with that, I'm just here to welcome you, and then I'm going to be a participant like you. We have, of course, our Chief and Lieutenant Scheider here, as well as our moderator, Marquita Stevens, who had worked with the school district and has been involved in a lot of these issues and matters over the years, and does a great job of moderating these types of discussions. And we're very pleased to have Marquita here to be with us again this evening. So I'll turn it over to Marquita, and she can sort of give her introduction and take it from here.
Thank you, Dan. He forgot to tell you that I love you. That's why I'm here. And I have to start off by saying welcome in addition to Dan's welcome. But more importantly, what happened to Patty's? The ice cream shop. Come all this way to go to Patty's. There's no Patty's. So we're really glad to be at this point in this process, because I know data collection issues, data collection processes, data collection itself has been at the forefront of many of you, your positions about the police-community relationships, knowing what they do, how they do it, when they do it, and making sure, more importantly, that they know what they do, what they're doing, when they do it, and how it's being done. And so I think tonight you'll get a pretty in-depth view of the information that they gather, the information that they want to know, the information that they process, and how they use it in their decision making. Data collection can be used for all different kinds of reasons. It can be used for projections. It can be used for revenue and staffing analysis. It can be used for any number of things, efficiencies. It can be used for all kinds of things in addition to behavioral issues. So it's not just that they collect this matter for, but it's to make the department and therefore the city run that much more smoothly. So I think we need to keep that in mind. The way the process will go is the chief and the lieutenant will talk about the data that they've collected, their participation in the citywide or the countywide process. You will then have an opportunity to ask some questions, and you will have, at the conclusion of that, an opportunity to look at your green sheets that are on your table and complete those. There should be one per person. If you don't have one, please raise your hand so we can make sure you get one. There should be one green sheet for each person. You'll answer the questions on that green sheet individually, and you can discuss it amongst yourself collectively. We will then, at the conclusion of a period of time that we allow for that, ask for not a report from every table, so everybody doesn't have to agree, but we'll just ask for half a dozen people to stand up and give us some indication of their answers or their perspectives on some of the questions that have been asked. Certainly, before you leave today, we'd want you to complete an evaluation, and that's the buff-colored sheet that's on your table. And you can leave those on the desk as you can complete those and leave them on the desk as you leave. Any questions about the format for this evening? We're going to hear from them. You can ask questions of them as you go. We're trying to make sure that we focus on the period of time since the Philando Castile killing. So we're looking at from 2016 up, basically, is what we're looking at. Certainly there are histories in any community's police department, but we're not trying to, recast all of that. Just whatever has been a trend, we want to kind of look at that, and that's what the data collection information will show. So with that in mind, everybody's clear on what we're going to be doing this afternoon or this evening? Take it away, Chief.
Thanks, Marquita. So Rick Mathwig, the chief with Roseville. So I've been with Roseville since 1989, and been with the chief going to be, I think, 8 years coming up in June. So Ramsey County's law enforcement agencies all got together toward the end of 16 and said, as we move forward as a profession, one of the things that the community is asking for is collection of data. So we all agreed to do that together as chiefs and the sheriff back in the fall, about in October or so of 16. and finally got things worked out with our records management system, our dispatch center. St. Paul had been collecting data for a long time. They changed how they did it. So we're all doing it the same. So we're talking apples and apples across the entire county of Ramsey. Now, it's not a state statute. It's not state mandated. We are the only, other than the city of Minneapolis, we are the only big group of folks in law enforcement in Minnesota that are doing it. So I have, thanks. And it's not stopping. In 2017, it's continue on for forever that there is a Ramsey County, I'm assuming, at least for long as for the next foreseeable future. And so we did that voluntarily to get out front and be transparent. I pride Roseville PD in being two things. We're transparent and we are a learning organization. So transparency is some of the things you've seen a lot difference in the last 5 or 6 years with Roseville as compared to how we used to be, because I think that's a flaw in law enforcement across the country is we're too hidden, we're too secret, because we want the bad guys to know. Bad guys aren't paying attention. We want the people that the citizens know what we're doing so they know what we do and why we do it. And the learning organization piece there too is that if we do make a mistake, we want to get better. If we have information that we're not looking at it, then why are we collecting it? If we're collecting it, let's look at it, let's learn from it. That's kind of what we're talking about here. So the idea tonight is to talk about the traffic stops. There's always something in law enforcement or the federal government that you want to talk to, but in the interest of everybody's time, we're talking about traffic stops, especially in 2017 with the information in here. So Lieutenant Scheider are going to tag team it, so you have to look and listen to me all the time. So this is only a snapshot of 2017, so that's what's going to be. A snapshot, I'll say, is I'm what's called in Minnesota law enforcement a non-working chief. Non-working means I don't take calls for service. Most of the I think about 80% of law enforcement agencies in Minnesota have 15 or fewer cops, sheriffs or cops. They're working chiefs, working sheriffs in most of those because they take calls for service. Roseville's too big, too complex, too much going on for me to be a working chief. Although I did make 5 traffic stops last year. And I drive around an unmarked car. People do that dumb stuff in front of me enough that I stopped 5 people. And I also sent out about 12 warning letters to people that says, oh, by the way, the person driving your car today blew the stop sign. It blew the stoplight at C in Lexington. Please let them know that they're driving like that and correct your behavior. So let's just say I had 17 traffic contacts last year. With those 5 traffic contacts, 40% of my contacts were with minority citizens. So one was an African-American female that I stopped for violating a stop arm school bus down in Larpenteur and Rice. That's actually a gross misdemeanor crime. She got a warning out of it. She didn't know. She didn't see the bus. Yep, she didn't see the bus. I did. The other one was an Asian female that blew the stoplight at B in Lexington when I was sitting there watching it. So I stopped her. The other 3 of my 5 traffic stops were white guys doing stuff. So it's only a snapshot. So if you want to look at a small information, you can draw some conclusions that may or not be there. In 2017, the Roseville Police Department changed our traffic philosophy where we have a great emphasis on stopping moving violations. Moving violations in Minnesota cause by far 80% of the total fatal and serious car crashes in Minnesota roads. Distracted driving, speeding, no seatbelts, and impaired driving accounted for 80%. Distracted driving is responsible for 1 in 4 crashes in Minnesota every year. So that's on your cell phone, answering emails, doing texting and things like that. So 1 in 4 crashes in Minnesota is because of that. So there's a lot of distracted driving information off of that. So I'd ask you to take a look at that. So we focused on moving violations that cause crashes. Tail lights out don't cause crashes. Brake lights out, headlights out, no license plate light out. Those don't cause crashes. That's not our focus. So 80% of our stops last year were of moving violations. 80% of our stops last year were of moving violations, and I expect it'll be about 80% this year and moving on. Some of our traffic stops went down, yes, because it's harder to find out there at 2 o'clock in the morning in Roseville, harder to find a speeding car or a car moving across the lanes without signaling than it is to find someone with no license plate or a cracked taillight or something like that. Our focus is, in 2017 in the future, as long as I'm chief here, we'll be on moving violations, and 80% of that is that. So I'll try to move over here so I'm blocking just not everybody at the same time. So this information here is the website for the city, for the PD. We didn't make color printouts, everybody, because we would have burned up a lot of trees and a lot of ink. So we've had this posted since the first week in February. It's there, it'll remain there. The 2018 data will be pushed with that in 2019, and we'll keep it as we go for historical purposes and looking at trends and things like that. So you can look at that information. You can see the sheets that we've had, and hopefully you have a chance to do that. But if you don't, take a look at that. So the next, yep. So Erika,
Perfect.
I advanced it.
Oh, thank you. So, like the chief said, back in 2016, the chiefs of Ramsey County came together and said, we want to start collecting this data. We had heard from citizens, a lot of questions. We didn't have the answers. At the time, we've had squad cameras in our squads for 10 years. So all of our traffic stops have been recorded, but we really didn't have that data. Without sitting down and watching all of those videos, it was hard to tell people what was going on. So I sat on the committee for Ramsey County, where we came together to figure out how are we going to collect this data. One of the biggest challenges we had is in our squad cars, we've got a mobile system that connects to dispatch. It's a big company that runs it. They have no program that allows you to collect that data. So that was one of our limitations. So we said, we got to find a way to make this work. So I got a picture up here of the squad screens. They're pretty small, but we were able to find a little space at the bottom that they were able to write a program so that every time an officer did a traffic stop, they had to capture data. The biggest challenge is we had limited space. So we had about 5 things that we could record. And I know we hear from people about, hey, we want different data or more data. This committee realized we really can collect these 5 things, otherwise we run out of room for the officers to enter that information. The other limitation is all of the Ramsey County agencies had to agree on collecting the same data. So Roseville doesn't have any way to say, hey, we'll collect these 5 things. St. Paul can collect this information. We all came together as a committee and agreed that we would, on every traffic stop in Ramsey County, we would collect race data, white, black, Latino, Asian, Native American, or other, gender, male, female, whether the person was searched as part of that traffic stop, whether the vehicle was searched, and then the last thing was the reason for the traffic stop. And I'll get into those a little bit more. We found that as a committee, we agreed that most traffic stops fit into 4 different categories. The first one, and this was our priority for the police department, were moving violations. This is the distracted drivers. These are the people running red lights, speeding, illegal U-turns, stop arm violations. So that's what constitutes a moving violation. Second category that officers would select would be vehicle violation. These are the things we're less concerned about. Their taillights out, maybe a headlight out, maybe too dark a tint on a window. So that would be classified as a vehicle violation. Investigate. This would be maybe an officer runs a license plate and finds out it's a missing person, or there is a pickup and hold on that vehicle because it was involved in a theft. Today we had a robbery, so the officers stopped that car because they had a license plate and they found the car. That would be an investigate. So that's the other category of stops. And then the last one would be a citizen complaint. This would be somebody calls in that there was a reckless driver on Lexington Avenue. Unfortunately, with a lot of those, by the time we get in the area, the cars are already up to Shoreview or already into St. Paul. So in Roseville, actually last year, we didn't have any traffic stops that were initiated because of a citizen calling in. Chief kind of already talked about it. When you look at our moving violations, that's in orange. I realize some of these slides are hard to see and some of the numbers. They're all of the same ones that are on our website. So after tonight, you can go see these same slides. They'll be a little bit easier to read. Moving violations, 2,038. Vehicle violations, which is the gray area, is 265. And then investigative stops is 156. So like the chief already mentioned, moving violations in 2017 made up 82% of our traffic stops, which was in line with kind of the message we had been sending to our officers. These are the things that are either people are getting injured, killed. It's the things we're hearing from residents. It's a #1 complaint. It's usually speed on their street, people running red lights. So it was important that we matched our traffic enforcement with the needs of the community and also what's going to save lives. Sure, yeah.
I just want to give you the opportunity to be clear on the previous slide. You indicated several things that you would collect, one of which was race. And I want to make sure that the audience knows that you mean that which the officer perceives to be whatever they're marking. They're not going to ask people what they identify racially as.
Yes, that is correct. And it's really difficult as an officer to, we realize that this data is limited. There's 5 categories to pick from, and our officers sometimes say it's hard to put somebody in a box where a lot of people have a wide variety of makeup. So it is really tough to try to limit it down to those 4 or those 5 categories. Unfortunately, like we talked about with space, that is a limitation. We had to come up with 5. It's a touch screen, so if you have any more than that, people start to overlap and then you have inaccurate data. So, and we'll kind of transition into some of the other results from the traffic stop with race next.
Thanks. So the next information is just, and so also the racial groups are established by the federal government. They were done eons ago. The last time I remember any substantive discussion about race in law enforcement, as far as putting people in 5 different boxes, was back in the mid-90s. That's the last time. So this is assigned by the federal government for what that's worth. So this is the chart here. Talks about for Asian citizens, 81% were for moving violations. So you can see everyone is around, other than Native American. We only had 13 traffic stops involving Native Americans, so that number is so small it can be skewed very easily. But the rest of the racial groups is made up with over 80% were moving violations like we wanted, like we expected, and what the officers produced, which was wonderful. Because that's the most common complaint in Roseville from citizens is speed in the neighborhood, people not stopping for the stop arm, people blowing the stop signs. It's also very common for St. Paul too. The big issues that St. Paul has, that Minneapolis has, that we don't face as much is still it's speed in the neighborhoods and blowing stop signs. The next information is traffic stop by race. So the orange group there is 60% of our traffic stops were for those considered white. Black is 21%, Black African American. Asian is 8%. Latino is 4%. Native American is 1%, and other is 6%. Like Lieutenant Scheider talked about, officers aren't asking what race are you. We are determining that. We decided that as a Ramsey County law enforcement group, that officers would select the race of the person just because. Otherwise, it could result in an argument that's unnecessary for the time. By race and gender, so we can see the males were stopped more often. If the husband and wife team are together in the car on your way home tonight, you can figure out why the guys are stopped more than the females. So you can have that discussion yourself. In 79% of the traffic stops, officers issued a written or verbal warning. So almost 80% of our stops were warning stops. One of the things we hear about was a comment, if you wanted to balance the budget in Roseville, go out and write speeding tickets on Old 8 or on B. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. In Minnesota, the way the statutes are written by our state representatives is only half of the fine goes to the city where the infraction occurred. Half of the fine goes to the city where the violation occurred. So when the troopers write citations down to 36, the money comes to Roseville if it's in Roseville. But a couple years ago I did the research. It's changed a little bit because of inflation. A couple years ago the basic speed citation was $126. The fine was $40. Roseville gets $20. $20 goes to the county, I think, for courts, and the other $86 goes to the state to help balance the state's budgets. That was done a couple governors ago. I don't vote either way. I'm an independent, as my mother and father were, but it was used to balance the budget. So $20 of the $126 goes to Roseville. Odds are when someone goes to court on that, because you get to go to court and contest that if you want to, odds are the Roseville cop that gave that citation is on overtime. Because at any given day during the business week, Tuesdays and Thursdays or Wednesdays, 3/4 of our patrol officers are off. So odds are they're on overtime. The way the union contract is written, they get 3 hours of overtime. That's about at least $150. So Roseville to get 20, we got to cash out 150. So it's not a moneymaker. Law enforcement in Minnesota does not make money when it comes to this sort of fines. We could talk about Missouri and Ferguson and some changes that were there. Minnesota is not like that, never was like that, never will be like that. So when we talk about balancing the budget, it can't be on citations. The goal of traffic enforcement is to change behavior. Over the years, I remember stopping some kid 20 years ago, going 50 down B towards Dale, which is 35. Actually, it was 55 because it was like 20 over. Talked with him. He gave a valid reason. I could tell in his eyes that he made a mistake. I tell in his eyes, in my mind, that he wasn't going to do it again. I gave him a warning. It would have been like a $170 fine at that time. So we should change behavior, and that works out well to do that. So on every stop, okay, the next person by race. So this is just the warnings and citations. So in 2017, 2459 traffic stops. We got that. Yeah, I already talked about that. Sorry. Race by gender. Person searched. Okay, now I'm on. I didn't practice this, so we didn't time it out. Person searched by race and gender. So on every traffic stop, officers had to record whether someone was searched. Out of the 2459 traffic stops, we searched only 2% of the people. That. Now, if they made a traffic stop for speed and they smelled dope, marijuana in the car, they did a search warrant, did a search on the car. That's called the probable cause search. They can do that. If they found marijuana in the car, let's say a bunch of it, and held him accountable, him or her accountable, that information was captured under a case number for an arrest, not a traffic stop. So over the years in the country, you'll see officers just snooping around cars and didn't find anything. We looked into cars and didn't find anything 2% of the time. So if we found something, it's not included there because it came into arrest or it came in a different statute or different case number. Hopefully that makes sense. Search by race and gender. I got to do that. I got to wait. Okay, sorry. So we've got information there. 2.5% of our stops involved the search of the vehicle. Same thing. So if a person was searched because they might have come out of the car, had marijuana smell on them, searched them, or they're in the car, we have suspicion to believe that there's stolen property in the car or something like that, that would be a search of the car, independent of searching of the person. So only 2.5% of our stops involve searching the vehicle. I'll hand it back over to Lieutenant Scheider to do a better job explaining things than I did.
Thanks. So although this wasn't part of the actual traffic stop data collection, it's something that we're now starting to look at. The location of where our traffic stops are compared to where our crashes are in the city. Like we talked about, our emphasis is trying to reduce crashes. So this map has got an overlay. It's a little bit hard to see, but the blue are motor vehicle crashes. So we've got them all mapped out, all the locations of crashes that were reported to the state. In red, you've got the moving violations. Now, it's sometimes hard to put an exact location on a stop, so these stop locations are where the officer actually stopped the individual. So it just kind of shows some interesting data on the two seem to match up. Where our officers are getting out and running traffic is a lot of the same spots where we're seeing high accidents. And we'll continue to move forward with that and also look at this data as we're moving forward. As part of this data collection, we also started to look at what time of day, when is traffic occurring, what days of the week. And there's a lot of data to look into. But this kind of gives you a breakdown. I know it's hard to see. Again, this is on the website, so you can certainly go and take a look at it. If you look at the far side over there, it starts at midnight and then goes all the way down by hours up to 11:59. On the very far column on this side, you've got the total number of stops. How it works in Roseville is we don't have a dedicated traffic unit. So officers working tonight have got their district. We've got districts within the city. They're responsible for all the calls for service in that district. They're responsible for any of our community outreach events. So like if a Boy Scout tour is coming up, an officer will go do that. They've got their report calls. Then, in their downtime, they run traffic. So when you start looking at some of these numbers, it's not surprising if you look at between midnight and 3 a.m., our traffic numbers are pretty high. Reason for that? Our calls for service are starting to slow down because most people are sleeping. But that's also a time when we have a lot of impaired drivers out in the road. And so officers are getting out there. They're doing a lot of traffic stops to try to get those impaired drivers off the road. When you go a little bit further down and you look at like between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., not a lot of traffic stops. It kind of starts to slow down. Not surprising. there's not a lot of traffic out between 3 and 6. Having worked a couple midnight shifts, granted it's been a long time, the roads are usually slowing down. There's a lot of delivery people out, the newspaper delivery, drivers you get to know. That also is a time when officers are usually writing reports. So if they arrested a drunk, they're now processing that paperwork and dealing with that. So then you start getting into the early morning times and we see an uptick. A lot of that is the day shift officers really focus on that morning rush hour. School bus stop arm violations, pedestrian crosswalks. We get a lot of people concerned that are out doing morning walks, runners, people bicycling to work, that we try to get out and do some enforcement there as well. As you go through the day, it starts to pick up, there gets to be more traffic. The one thing that we kind of started to notice is between when you get to about 6 and 7 o'clock, traffic slows down. We don't do a lot of traffic. Part of that is that's our busiest times a day. So a lot of our traffic enforcement is dictated by the other duties that the officers have to respond to. So they're not out doing traffic at 6 p.m. if they've got 2 crashes that they need to respond to. So just some interesting data that we're going to continue to look at, but again, with Roseville not having a specific traffic unit, it really falls on that officer that works that district. And we rely a lot on citizen complaints. When people call us and say, hey, I've got a concern in my neighborhood, that gets passed on to those officers to get out there and enforce it during those times. One of the things that we started doing this last couple of years that the chief pushed was getting overtime traffic details to handle some of those really problematic spots. Couple that we've really hammered hard is along Lexington Avenue and along Hamlin. We've heard a lot of complaints of people running red lights, some near misses. We've been focusing a lot on pedestrian details, especially along Hamlin Avenue. We hear a lot from the residents. So again, as we've moved forward with our traffic focus, a lot of it is driven by the information that we receive from citizens and what you guys are seeing and getting out there and trying to make those stretches of road safer. We'll kind of transition to the demographics, and I'll let the chief take over from there.
Thanks. So we talked about the makeup of the people that we stopped. We're talking about the makeup of who is Roseville, who's in Roseville. So the last U.S. Census was done in 2010, and again, this information is on the website, showed that Roseville had a population of 33,360, with 20.7% of the population being persons of color. And then in addition, we have about 36,000 people travel into Roseville daily to work. So there are more, which helps the taxes on your houses, having the businesses paying for part of it, which helps out a lot. So there's a lot of people that come into Roseville to work. And where they come from, I don't know, but it is there. The data that you have in front of you here is from Roseville schools. Every year, they get their demographic data of the Roseville students in all of the schools. In that case, in 2017, the most recent one they did, 53% of the students were persons of color. White students were 45%. Black or African American were 20%. And Hispanic students accounted for 13% of the student enrollment. And Native American is 2%. So that's the makeup of Roseville. You compare that to the 2010 census, which in 2018 is way out of date because we're a fluid society. Just a question about the census?
Yeah, could you clarify that the school district
Yep.
numbers are those under 18?
Right? Student population? I'll let Karen Schaub with the schools will tell you that.
Those numbers could include also students who are 18 to 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. We do have some programs that we do educate students up to 21 years old.
But it's school-age population.
School-age population from kindergarten to
And not,
graduation.
and not families at home. Adults arrested by residency. So traffic stops. So for years now, we've been giving information to the council. About 7, 8 years ago, we started this. And within the last 3 or 4 years, we have monthly summaries. So I'm hoping there's a lot of heads that are going to nod here when I ask you, every month, do you get our monthly summary? If you're not nodding your head, over there, there's a bunch of ways to keep in contact with us. Because every month, you're going to get from us some of this information, address, some more interesting calls for service, kind of like a crime novel, just in a synopsis of it. Summary of our training, summary of what's going on, kind of keeps you every month. We're always a month or so behind because there's a lot of stuff going on. But every month you can get those. So if you can get it by email, get it from us. Every 2 weeks I do a newsletter that lets you know what's happening. I'm hoping that there's a fair amount of people are nodding their head that the next newsletter that you're going to get is coming out on the 23rd that you'll get. So if you don't get my newsletter that explains some of this stuff, keep in contact with us via email. You can do that. So this information as far as traffic stops, which is the, I'm going to call it orange, adult arrests for 2017. Whoops. There we go. Big fingers. Every month of every year, we arrest more people from St. Paul than Roseville. Every year of every month for the last several years. By the end of the year, it's arrests from Minneapolis more than Roseville. And Roseville's here, and Ramsey County's there, and all the way down to outstate Minnesota. Our traffic stops do kind of follow with that. Rosedale is a big 13 million people come to Rosedale every year. We're the only suburb in the state that borders on both Minneapolis and St. Paul. So there's a reason. One of the traffic stop initiatives that Lieutenant Scheider talked about is along Lexington and Hamlin. In 2016, then again in 2017, we did the same semaphore details, where if you blow a red light, it's a semaphore detail. So in 2016, so it's from Hamlin from C down to B, and it's Lexington from C down to B. So you can, in your mind, you can see those stoplights. In the middle of Roseville, right? In 2016, 67% of the people we stopped were not from Roseville. In 2017, 77% of the people we stopped were not from Roseville. In the middle of Roseville, where are they going to, north and south? I don't know. They're going somewhere, but they're coming through Roseville. So it kind of follows. Yes?
Do these arrests come from the traffic stop and they get a warrant or something?
Nope. Thanks for asking that. The blue is basically thefts, assaults, robberies, burglaries. Part 1 crimes that I think Erika Scheider is going to talk about a little bit are the crimes. So traffic is traffic, and these arrests is not traffic. Make sense? So this information is there. You can get it on the monthly summary. You get it in the newsletters and things like that. On this 2017 traffic stop information, if an officer doesn't write a written warning or a written citation, and they just go up and verbally warn, like my warnings, I said, all 5 of those, I didn't capture any driver information other than the race and whether I searched them and the female or male, thing like that. Their address is not captured unless the officer writes a written warning or writes a citation. It's all computerized, but nonetheless. So of those, so it's a less than the 2,400 traffic stops. Of those of the traffic violators, 16% were Roseville citizens. 16% of those 2,400 traffic stops where we had captured the information from the driver, not all of them, 16% were from Roseville, the rest from out of state. A third of recorded residents on traffic stops were from Minneapolis and St. Paul. So a third of the people are coming into your town and blowing your stoplights and your stop signs. So if you have friends and family that live in the other cities, you might want to tell them to knock it off. Yep.
Where do drunken driving arrests go? On the orange because it's moving traffic, or under the blue for
Arrests.
arrests? Under arrest.
Mm-hmm. And then Lieutenant Scheider will talk about arrest information.
Okay, so this is kind of transitioning from traffic to actually arrest data. We literally just got these numbers 2 days ago, so the slides are not on the website. We'll try to get them uploaded, but we knew there could be some questions, not just with traffic, but who are we arresting for different crimes. Chief kind of talked about it. The FBI requires that every agency submit the same data, so it's a uniform reporting system. Part 1 crimes are assault, auto theft, burglary, theft, murder, rape, robbery, and a bunch of other ones. Part 2 are drugs, DWI, fraud, stolen property, weapons. In 2017, again, this is 2 days old, so we haven't had a chance to dive into the numbers, but just looking at the big picture, 50% of the arrests we made were white individuals, 40% were black or African American, and then you get into some smaller, Asian was 5%, American Indian 4%. The big thing with the FBI statistics is Hispanic is reported as white. That's how the FBI collects that data. So if you're looking for, wait a minute, only 1%, under the FBI, this is their federal guidelines, those are classified as under white. There are some changes that were just made to the FBI reporting requirements. It's very confusing. We're literally just kind of getting everything set, but it looks like moving forward we'll have a lot better racial data, or they're working out some of these issues. But this is kind of the preliminary numbers that we're looking at. We just started to kind of dive into these numbers as well, is the male versus female. Again, I know some of these are small, but female is in blue and the male is in orange. And some of the numbers that just jumped out, like I said, we had 2 days literally to kind of look at this, was that for the highest number of arrests, it's black males and white females. Just a quick glance, it looked like white females were typically arrested, or most often arrested, for theft and drugs, were the most common arrest reasons. And for arrest of black males, it was theft, assaults, and frauds. And again, we have not got into digging through the data 2 days ago, but something that we're going to continue to look at is try to look into these numbers and then also compare it to our traffic stats and see what lessons there are to learn. I know the chief will talk about kind of some of the moving forward, how we can we've got all this data now, but now what do we do with it? How do we learn to move forward as an organization and a community to better serve everyone? Teed it up perfect for looking forward.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
So this is the last slide before we have questions and hopefully some answers. But looking forward is learning organization is seeking feedback from the community. So since the first week in February, we've had a button you could push to give us input. We think we've only gotten 2 or 3, maybe 3 emails about that. So we're doing that. We are only the 3rd agency in Ramsey County. St. Paul was first. We were second. Maplewood was third to put this information on our website. None of the other agencies have. We are the only agency in Ramsey County, state of Minnesota, that's having a meeting like this. So I just want to give us a pat in the back in the community that's here to talk, that we're the only ones that are having a meeting like this. The rest of the agencies aren't doing it like we are. We're also working with Hamline University. So we have personal connections with some doctors down in Hamline, PhDs, and their doctoral students are looking at the raw data. So they've gotten the raw data at the beginning of February, and to go looking for the why behind the why. Why is this happening when it doesn't reflect the census data? Why are more females being arrested for this versus warned for that? Why is that? So we're having them look at that. We've had a couple discussions with them. Doctoral students are working on that. Do I have a timeline when they're going to get done? I have no idea, but they're working on it. Supervisors review the individual officers' data. That was back in February, having conversations with the officers so they know. That's one of the things why we collect it, if we don't know what we're collecting, and let's look at it. We're going to continue. Operative word there is continue our yearly implicit bias training to all police department staff. We've been doing that since I think about 2014. Not mandated by the state. Will be next year. For Minnesota, we were ahead of the curve with that. Mandatory in-service diversity training since 2014. That's above and beyond the implicit bias training is diversity training with the department since 2014. And as part of this, there's a lot of people in the room here. There's a lot of people watching on Facebook Live. There's probably more people to watch it next week or the week after. The people that have attended the meeting or watched the meeting online on demand will be offered the chance to go along with the Roseville officer during some of these upcoming overtime, especially semaphore violations, to see from the officer's perspective the traffic stop. No other agencies in Ramsey County is doing this that I'm aware of. So if you want to, if you've watched the meeting or you're here, talk to Lieutenant Joe Adams, which is right there. He'll talk with you about doing about an hour ride with an officer. And if the times don't work out for you, you can hop in with me on a Saturday or a Sunday or a Tuesday night, and I'll take you to be in Lexington, and we'll sit in the DVD store, used to be the TCF, and you'll sit where I sat, and we're going to watch cars violate that. And from my perspective. So this is not to change anybody's mind. This is not to mind wash. This is just to give you a chance from the officer's perspective to look at the moving violations, because remember, we're focusing on moving violations. So if you're interested in that, see Joe. FBI and the BCA tells us that you have to have a criminal history background check before you can jump in the squad with an officer. Just keep that in mind. It's not our rules. It's not the states. It's the feds. Once again, the feds come in and tell us what to do at times. So we have to do that because of what's inside the squad car. We have a Lights On program that we started along with other agencies in the metro 2 years ago. And then Ted Bronson from Bronson's Auto down at Beandale got a hold of me and says, how come I'm not included? And I said, Ted, you find a bunch of people to do it, and you do it. And he did. So he found these repair shops in Roseville that's a Lights On coupon. So again, we're still focusing on moving violations. But because Roseville has part of the most, the highest concentration of poverty in Minnesota, comes out of St. Paul, comes into Roseville off of Larpenteur. There's a high concentration of poverty in parts of Roseville and neighboring areas. So a lot of people that don't have a lot of extra cash can't fix that taillight, can't fix that brake light. We give them this. So they can give that as a voucher to go get it fixed. And we've had a lot of positive interaction with people on this. So we've got that in the future. Our CSO hiring process, we're going to have one of our CSOs get sucked up by the DNR. And the state gets one of our CSOs every so often. So we have an opening, and we're going to have it in a month or two. We have an application process that's going to open up the end of this week. Community service officer is a CSO. They're college students looking to be in law enforcement, usually a 2 or 4 year program. They work part-time for us. They drive the black and white pickup around town. They do animal control. They give parking tickets and help with snowbirds and things like that. We'll be doing that. As we have done the past several years, one of the components is for hiring them is you have to speak one of the 5 most spoken languages in Roseville schools, which is Spanish, Somali, Hmong, Karen, and Thai, what we have last. If they don't have that, they have to have living or working with diverse communities. They have to have one of those 2 things or they can't, or their application won't be accepted. That's how we're trying to diversify our ranks within Roseville PD and reflect the community that we serve. So we've been doing that for years, so when you see that, if you see that opening, kick it out there to the person that you might know. In 2016, we did a customer service survey. We sent out nearly 20,000 cards of every driver that we stopped, every victim of most crimes, except for some sensitive crimes, every person who called us in because the neighbor got broken into, except for we didn't give it to loss prevention at Rosedale and Kohl's and Best Buy because we talked to them every day, so we didn't give it them. And every person who was involved in a traffic crash that we wrote. So that's a lot of people that we sent out survey cards. Maybe there's somebody in the room that got one. Hopefully you took the survey. In 2016, we sent out nearly 20,000 of those cards inviting people to take an anonymous survey that was hosted by University of Northwestern St. Paul. Roseville didn't host it. Roseville didn't manipulate the data. University of Northwestern took the data, warehoused it, and culminated and gave it to us in like a PDF. So we couldn't mess with it. So out of those 20,000 customer service survey cards that we sent out, 92% of the people surveyed said we had satisfied or very satisfied with our customer service on that traffic stop, the customer service on that traffic crash, our customer service on that burglary report, our customer service on your neighbor being broken into. So that's as we look into the past and we look into the future, that's where we're going. Coffee with a Cop, I've got a couple information packets out there. Our next Coffee with a Cop is going to be Saturday, April the 7th at Barley's from 10 in the morning to 11:30 in the morning. So Barley's, April 7th. When you get my newsletter on the 23rd, you're going to see this. So don't write it down. Wait to get my newsletter and you're going to see it. That's my challenge. Anything else you want to talk about? Otherwise, questions relative to the information that we get, because there's going to be group discussions. If I stumble over a word that didn't make sense, now's the time to ask me what the heck I was talking about. Yeah. Oh, sorry, back there first.
Microphone.
Do you break that down anywhere by race? Because that would help us understand, you know, if you are a person of color living in Roseville, are you more likely to get pulled over? That's the piece I'm not sure if I missed it or if it was there.
I can answer it. So that's kind of part of this ongoing relationship or partnership that we have with Hamlin. It's actually 2 different database systems. So as we move forward, we got to find a way to correlate those together. So that data came from 2 different places, if that makes sense. So definitely something that we can look at and work with Hamlin. Correct. It exists in 2 different places, so it's a matter of trying to merge those two systems together. Like I mentioned, this was kind of an add-on program, and so we're still trying to figure out a better way. Ramsey County is really pushing for this big vendor of this computer system to come up with a program which would allow us to customize and do a lot more data mining. So, but definitely something that we will note to talk to Hamlin about to see if we can have those 2 systems produce that data.
Which 2 were you referring to? You said put 2 things together. What 2?
You're talking about wanting to link the people in Roseville, the Roseville address stops, to be able to break that data out and get a bigger picture.
If you're a person of color, are you at a higher likelihood of being pulled over percentage-wise to the demographic? That would be very helpful.
Which is a similar question to that I had, except I've made it broader in terms of any of the categories. So you would want to look at the percentage of people warned as it relates to not only race but gender, where they live, or where they've been stopped. That way you could get at whether there are particular neighborhoods that happens more frequently in, et cetera. There's a number of categories that you can look at the percentage of stops against. So you're saying that the Hamlin project, let's call it, will help in being able to analyze that?
Yes, or see if we can link those 2. It's 2 totally different systems. And that kind of comes back to we were really limited to those 5 pieces of data. We had to come up with, these are the things, this is what we have room to collect. Through our records management system, we were able to pull in some other data, but it's still now getting all of that to talk together will be things that we work with Hamlin on, but a great thing that we'll certainly look at.
Your question up front.
I was wondering, what is, I guess I'm asking this in part because you said, if I'm correct, that you don't capture data on people who are stopped for a warning, but only if they actually receive a citation, correct?
Yeah, a verbal warning would be when like my 5 stops, I don't have a computer in my car, so I would either warn you verbally, tell you to knock it off, or I could go back to the PD and handwrite a citation out and follow up with that. So if I just warned you in person, I would never capture your information, let alone your name and address. But if I gave you a written warning, a written citation, then it would be captured and represented here.
So I guess that being the case, can I ask, what is the process for determining whether a person receives a verbal warning or a ticket? Is that like an officer's discretion type of thing? Or is that like a, like a hard and fast kind of rule? Because, yeah, could you address that?
That's officer discretion. It would be officer discretion. So we can't, there's a state statute that says we can't say you have to write out 15 citations this month. There's a state law that's a quota law, you can't do that. It's an officer discretion. So if someone, like I talked about the kid that I stopped, I could see that the traffic stop had something to do, they can warn people verbally or warn them with a ticket. It's just a warning citation, but the citation to go to court is officer discretion. So driving history has a lot to do with it. So if I stopped you for speeding and you were 12 over on C, and I can see that in the last year, other agencies in Ramsey County on the mobile, which is this information here, White Bear Lake stopped you last month, St. Anthony stopped the year before for speed, you're probably going to get a ticket because the warnings aren't working. So the driving history has a fair amount to do with that, especially for us. We're not concerned about taillights out. We're not concerned about headlights out. So if you get a ticket from St. Anthony or whomever for a taillight out, we don't care. We just care that you're moving violations, so that got something to do with it. But yeah, so just remember this, the questions are clarification we talked about because the groups are going to get a chance to talk about. You got community service officer, they're the college students that work part-time for us. Valuable, they're overworked and underpaid.
Hi, my name is Allison Thrash, and I'm curious, you keep referencing that we're getting some help from Hamlin and looking at the data. Could you tell us about the discipline of the researchers? What's their expertise, and do you know anything about their methodology? There's a lot of different ways that you could do data analysis.
Good question. I know they're doctoral students in the PhD program. Craig Waldron is the city manager, used to be in over in Oakdale and somewhere else now is too. He runs the program. Corey, are you okay with telling what it is? Because Corey Yunke is our person that has a personal relationship with Dr. Waldron to get this going.
speak into Erika's uniform. So yes, I'm working with Hamlin. I'm a Hamlin alumni for the public administration program, and so we're working with Dr. Anita Larson, who's worked with a decent amount of data with Hennepin County in different areas, but she's the professor for the research methods for the doctoral program. So I met with them and really just looking at the data, not diving in as much with analytics, of just really doing a pretty hard literature review to see what's already out there, what's been done, and really just trying to look at all the variables that could affect this, as far as looking at proportionality of those drivers that are pulled over. What is the baseline for an appropriate, overall number as far as analyzing it? So a lot of times we look right at the census data, but you kind of have to assume somewhat that not all drivers have the same probability of being pulled over. There's a lot of driver experience, driver history, all sorts of reasons for that. So really just using this as a sandbox of data for the doctoral students to kind of look into and see what we can find out. So no push for a real end of conclusion, just kind of keep moving and seeing what we can put together as a team.
Corey, what's your name and title?
Oh, Corey Yunke, Community Relations Coordinator, Crime Prevention Coordinator, Crime Analyst, Corey. So, yeah.
So, text question. Want to make sure that the warning stops that are more than just the that are just the verbal ones, like I talked with her about, that race and gender and stop information is collected. It's just the verbal warning stops. The location of the driver's address is not captured. So I want to make sure all the warning stops, those 5 data categories were collected. Even if it's just a verbal warning versus a written warning, a written citation. Hopefully I made that. Yep.
Hi, Chief. I have 2-part questions. Looking at the traffic stop data collection initiative, it looks like the residents of minority in Roseville are 20.7%. In the data that you showed, they're mostly numbers. So number-wise, Caucasians are going to look like more are stopped because there's just more of them. You know, countrywide, there's 13% black. So can we understand why the data was presented in numbers and not percentages? And the other part is, Philando wasn't living in Falcon Heights when he was stopped. So I'm not sure the emphasis on why we're focusing on the residents, the people that are being stopped that are not part of Roseville residents. Can you explain, kind of emphasizing, like, if they stop, they get stopped, and issues happen no matter what, and we are an attraction city. So why are we focusing that the majority of the people that are stopped are not Roseville residents? I tried to understand that.
Well, I think that to answer the second question, if you do ride along with the officer with me, you're going to see what we can and can't see in a squad car when we've decided to stop them for speed, or stop them for blowing the stoplight, or stop them for the lane use or something like that. So the moving violation occurs at a distance from the officer. Officer will stop that person. It just happens to be, more often than not, a resident of somewhere else than Roseville, if that makes sense. The numbers, we try to keep the same percentages all the way through. If it didn't happen, then I apologize for not making it congruent, but that's what we tried to do.
I noticed one of the groups that you had was Alaskan Native. How did Alaska get in there?
Good question. Again, the feds.
No.
Oh, rest in peace?
I think it's the next 2 more.
What's that?
I think it's like 2 more. Pie chart. Nope. A couple more. There we go. Back. There we go. So all of these categories are set by the FBI. It is standard across the country. We don't have any control over that. And that's the system I talked about, that there were just some changes that came out. We're not really sure how that's going to all look for 2018 data, but we recognize this doesn't provide a lot of useful information or some of the questions that people have. It's hard with these categories. So moving forward, we hope to have better data. Like I said, I got this data 2 days ago, so we have not had a good chance to sit down and actually dive into the numbers and get a little bit better, better presentation for tonight.
Hello, my name is Janet Elmore. I was the Roseville Human Rights Chair, and in 2008 I took Officer Brady Martin to a jury trial, and we won. It's a really important piece here of my history, and you use the phrase, the why behind the why. So let's just suppose there's a 14-year-old kid riding a bike with his African-American friends. The Roseville police grab him, they bring him in, they handprint him, fingerprint him, take a picture. Lo and behold, his dad shows up with the receipt to the bike. Aha. 15 letters. My husband's a lawyer. Letters by his dad. We needed to get a judge's order to get the information back. 2008. Kid is grabbed again. This time I show up. I'm the one they charged. Here's the boy today, Andreas. He's graduating from med school in 2 months. Just think how his life could have ended if we didn't have the money, the resources to keep up to get the information back on this kid. My big question is, I want to know, does the Roseville police ever go back and say, hey, I made a mistake? In the past, they didn't. 15 letters. We had everything. A letter that says, Richard Mathwig was one of the investigators. I know you weren't the chief at that time. Okay? So my big question is, what has really changed? Do we ever go back and say, I'm sorry? I also want to mention I'm a retired St. Paul teacher. 2015, 33 years. Roseville Schools is doing a wonderful job training teachers. I sub nearly every day, and the work the Roseville Schools they're doing is fantastic. But I'll ask each of you, if you don't have the monies to do what we did, you're stuck. And it's still painful, but honest to God, we kept everything. And here's the proof of he could have been Philando, he could have been shot. But here he is today, everyone. My question would be, how long do you keep the data? Our complaints and things, are they really changed? It might not have to do with this, but it certainly does. Thank you.
Okay.
So data, like police reports are kept, there's a whole retention period. Again, it's on our website. One of the points you talked about though is, does the police department make mistakes? Absolutely. We make mistakes. We try to learn from them. The chief said it, we're a learning organization. I've worked for the department for 20 years. I've worked for 3 different chiefs. I will tell you, under Chief Mathwig, he demands excellence. He demands that we are constantly looking at, is there ways to do better? And so if there are things as an organization we need to improve on, he holds the leaders, Joe and I, to, hey, you got to get answers. When there's complaints that come in, we take them seriously. So I can tell you for the 3 chiefs I've worked for, Chief Mathwig is probably the most demanding in a positive way, in that, hey, we've got a community to serve, and we're constantly looking at, hey, did we make a mistake, or could we have just done better? And that's kind of this whole traffic initiative. He was one of the people that really pushed with Ramsey County and said, we are going to publish our data. No matter what, whatever it shows, come January or February of next year, this data is going out there. And we were one of the first people. So I just want to add that, yes, we make mistakes, and we learn from them, and we try to do constantly, or trying to look to do better.
Okay, we got a bunch of questions, so.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that data question, because when I saw the report that came out, I did some number crunching too, and I was pretty disturbed by the differences between the demographics of Roseville and then the way it played out in the racial disparities of stops, then to searches, then to violations. And I guess now seeing that the stops come from a number of places, I'd like to be able, and it shouldn't be that hard to number crunch, but to see how those demographics change when you reflect it from point of origin, to see how different is St. Paul from Roseville. Is it enough to make up the differences that we're seeing in those numbers? Part of it, all of it, none of it? I can't see from the data that's here, but I'm sure it's pretty easy to figure that out. So I think that would be really helpful. And then the other part of that is also when I see the data that says that we are still seeing differentials that are despairing, that don't match the demographics, whether it's gender or race, I don't think it's any surprise to many of us why that happens. And I'm thrilled that there seems to be an effort from all sorts of different angles to stop that. I just want to reiterate the concerns that, you know, my son has been stopped as well, and he's a person of color, and you can't undo that damage to a person, because just as you might have the bias going towards a person of color, and now there's that fear that every person represents the worst, my son now feels that way about the police. And I grew up thinking the police were there to help me, and he thinks I better go. These are not people who are helping me. So you can't undo that. So I'm thrilled that there's work trying to be done to get to that. But I think just really being honest with the numbers and really peeling it back and being as transparent as you can is to be lauded. But keep going. I think that's the only way to get down to the bottom of it.
Can you go back to the slide that had the numbers that who to reference?
You go ahead. If you want to go back.
And just to clarify, because I know some of the data gets a little bit confusing. So that first slide that I talked about with, I'll go back to it, on every single traffic stop, regardless of whether it was just a verbal warning, anytime an officer initiates a traffic stop, this set of data we have, race, male, female, vehicle searched, person searched, and then the reason for the stop. That's the only data that is on every single traffic stop. When we start getting into some of the addresses and we start getting into that, that's where we need the system to get better so that that number crunching is accurate. And we're certainly, I know Ramsey County is really pushing for this vendor to find a system that can do that, because this is kind of like adding on a room to your house. It just doesn't quite match up, but you do the best you can. So, but we realize there are limitations with only having 5 categories on every single traffic stop.
This is a quick question, just something that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That you mentioned the 2016 Roseville census estimate was 26% of the population persons of color. And then the Roseville schools 2017 census was saying 53% students of color. Am I assuming correctly that the Roseville schools are getting a lot of influx from students out of district?
So Roseville area schools, so it does go into Maplewood, Little Canada, St. Paul.
Right.
And the census is a U.S. census from 2010. And
Well, this is the 2016 estimate.
Okay.
So, but there are, I assume, a number of students who elect to come to Roseville from St. Paul to attend school.
I think Roseville attracts students from all over, yeah.
Right, right.
Which is great for them, for Roseville schools.
So I'm assuming that's why some of the difference in the statistics.
The other reason is because the Roseville schools cover 7 cities. So you're comparing a number that is larger because it's outside of your geographic boundaries to a number that's within your, so it's not the same.
No, Roseville area schools includes
7 cities.
Shoreview and Maplewood.
Right.
You get students from the University of Minnesota St. Paul campus, the Commonwealth area, and that's not Roseville either.
Okay, we're kind of running short, so Marquita probably may have to cut this off pretty soon. She runs a tight ship.
Okay. I was very interested in the map with the red and blue dots where all the accidents happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering how a patrol decides where he goes for the day and spends his time the most efficient way. And if I understood correctly, residents seem to hold a little bit of push in this. And I live on Cleveland Avenue, which only has residents of maybe 12 households. And I would think if you look at data of how much traffic goes in certain areas, it'd be interesting to see, if you have more traffic issues based on where they're patrolling the regular most part of the day, or if it's, based on what. All I'm saying is on my area in Cleveland, we have less residents to complain about it, I've been there about 30-some years. I know I've made a few phone calls. I do not see patrolling in our area that often, though I know if you ever read the next door Fairview Southwest area, you'll hear about a number of neighbors mentioning about the intersection of County Road B in Cleveland, which is a high area that's very concerning, and I witness it very often of how high traffic, fast-paced people come off the freeway and try to go from 2 lanes down to 1 and use the suicide lane quite often. And anyway, I could go on and on and on. So I'm very curious how you decide how you patrol for the day.
We're giving Joe the mic. Old age is an example. All complaints, no crashes. So sometimes a squeaky wheel gets some grease. Okay. If you live on Old 8, you know what I'm talking about.
And that's what I was thinking, Lexington Hamlin has lots of residents there, and I'm guessing the age group is on the phone a lot.
Yeah, and that's true, and I thought they kept the microwave phone away from me for a reason, but no, I'm kidding. So yeah, as the chief and Lieutenant Scheider had mentioned, when we're working, we are held to a standard of responding to calls. So that's going to be our primary responsibility. And depending on the time of day that we're working, too, how we segment our day is our next most important thing that we're going to be doing is community outreach. So we're going to be looking for areas where we can do community outreach, and that's a lot of times heavily populated areas, schools, parks, things of that nature. But obviously, when we get traffic complaints or criminal complaints, that is also where we're going to focus our efforts. We get a lot of theft from autos in Roseville and residential areas as well as commercial areas, and a lot of traffic complaints. So we know already through crash data, through certain things, areas that are going to be beneficial for us to patrol. We just know it. Snelling and County Road B, areas like that are highly traveled, a lot of accidents. That said, there's going to be other areas that we don't see. We can't be everywhere in Roseville. At times, we might only have 4 officers working the entire city. So there's going to be things that we can't see with our own eyes. So where do we patrol? Those areas first, but then when we get calls from community members and complaints, that's where we're going to focus our efforts next. So it takes a team really to build it up for us to be able to identify those specific areas. So at Cleveland and County Road B, when they're coming off the freeway like crazy, we're aware of that, so we try to get there, but it may go by the wayside for a little bit if we're busy elsewhere. So it's very important for you to call, and we will have officers there. The calls usually come directly to my desk, and I'll make sure that somebody's there because it is a key concern of our area is a lot of the dangerous traffic. So we need to know and we need to work as a team really, and that's when we start to focus our efforts.
I'm just kind of curious because we have semi-trucks that always have problems with mapping on 35 and 36 area, and they're doing U-turns constantly on Cleveland Avenue. I'm just bringing it up. And plus, it's the university people coming through.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, but call anytime. Don't worry about it. I'll take a call anytime.
Marquita might need to weigh in here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our chief and lieutenant for being willing to step forward like this. A lot of the questions that you've been asking, particularly in the latter moments, you can capture on your green sheets because they have to do with what information you want, what you're not seeing or what you're not sure you're seeing. And you can put that on your green sheets in answer to one of those questions, or on the back. If it's not the answer to a question, you can certainly use the back side of the sheet to write down information that you might want to know. The question would be, because this is the only meeting that we're going to have around data collection, will they be able to see answers to their questions, let's say in the next monthly newsletter? You do it once a month or once a quarter?
Yeah, the monthly summers come once a month, newsletter every 2 weeks. It all depends on what Hamlin and what their schedule does and allows. Try to get it all working in concert. But yes, there'll be some communication that if you're paying attention to us at all, you'll find it.
All right.
You'll
so
get
then,
it.
Whatever you're asking, I'll put together and give to the group, and you can look for answers in the next, I'd say 30 to 60 days. Some of it you'll be able to answer just because it's something you can answer. Does that sound like a plan? Take the next 15 minutes to talk amongst yourselves as well as write your own reflections on the questions that you have to ask. We'll reconvene together at 8, and we'll pick a few people to share what they want to share out of this process.
This isn't? This might be an additional one.
It's on there's a link.
I need your attention. We'll take a few minutes to share with one another in the larger group. Does anybody want to share one of their answers to one of the questions? Let's take question number 1. And the question has to do with, has your comfort level changed regarding the ability of the police department as a result of this presentation tonight? Has it changed? Has it changed regarding your comfort level in terms of them being aware of traffic stops by race of driver, of them being able to address the impact of race on any ensuing issues stemming from the stop? Well, you know they're aware of traffic stops by race. Oh, okay. Okay. Can you address that?
You're wondering, like, what's being discussed with the individual officers?
Well, the question says, am I comfortable that you guys are changing the ability of the police department to address the impact of race on issues stemming from the stop? I don't know what you've discussed with the officers making the stops, so how would I know whether anything can change?
Sure. One of the things that we did when we got this data, it was broke down by officers. So each supervisor was given that data and sat down with each officer to look at that data, to look at what districts they're working, what time of day, what are their traffic stops, what are their numbers. We're going to continue to look at that quarterly with our officers. In addition to that, Hamlin is also assisting with us with that as well, to take that data, determine the time of days that officers work may present different data than a daytime officer. You know, Roseville looks very different at different times of day. So we're still digging into those, but each supervisor was given all of the data for the people they supervise, the officers, and asked to take a look at it, sit down and meet with them, and go over that data. But that'll be an ongoing thing that we continue to look at.
Okay, so the data that they present.
Oh, Joe, do you want to grab the mic?
And that's a very good question. And we touched on it a little bit earlier, and one of the things that we had found, and we found it countrywide, and it's one of the things that we're really trying to get to the bottom of, is a lot of times race and poverty are intertwined. Mm-hmm. And that's why Chief Mathwig has decided that, you know what, we're going to be focusing on moving violations, because what comes along a lot of times with poverty, people not being able to fix taillights, people not being able to fix headlights, people having turn signals out. So with the focus of moving violations and a Roseville Police Department focusing on moving violation, we're hoping to start to eliminate the racial disparity a little bit. Is it 100% effective? Absolutely not. But we're recognizing that there's areas to improve on, and that's one of the big areas that we really hope to see, not the lack of disparity a little bit. And we're really pushing that for the officers, and all the officers have buy-in, as proof with the 80% of moving violation stops.
Anybody else on that first question have any change in your comfort level? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I recently attended the police department's Citizens Academy, and Officer Brady was saying that when he stops someone, he will ask them how they're doing. Where are you going tonight? Did you have fun? Oh, I see your kids are with you. Is everybody having fun? So in other words, he's kind of relaxing everyone before he makes a decision to pursue what was going on, if he's going to search the car, if he's going to give a ticket. I really was impressed with that kind of behavior where he kind of broke the ice and relaxed people so they weren't quite so tense. I was just impressed.
Okay.
I have a question.
Wow, that's a totally different Officer Brady. My son got sworn at and basically grabbed. Maybe that trial softened him a little bit.
Number 2, is the data that is being collected the right data? There were several of you who had comments around what data was being presented. So this might be an area where there's a lot of comment.
Yeah, no, thank you, and I am very impressed and glad to see that the city and the county are collecting this data. One of the things that we talked about was having percentages would be helpful. So as I was sitting here through the presentation, I pulled up the Ramsey County demographics as maybe a way to think about, do we have racial disparities? And Ramsey County is about 68% white, 12% black, 15% Asian, 7% Latino. And the stops break down, 60% white, 21% black, 8% Asian, 4% Latino. The piece that I think would be helpful in the percentages would be sharing the ratios of searches and citations. And that is a little bit disturbing as I looked at it, that white folks were about 1.6% would be searched, 3.2% of black people, 3% of Asian, a little over 4% of Latino. So you're about twice as likely to be searched if you're non-white than white. And then on citations, there's a similar bias. There seems to be about 20% of white people receive a citation, where it ranges between 30 and 35, 36% of non-whites receiving a citation. So I think sharing those percentages, making it a little more transparent would be really helpful. And then I think the question would be, and I hear you're doing a lot about that, but what's from a police force perspective, what would you, how do you react to those ratios, and what's your reaction to seeing that there is that bias? And I think a Stanford study had also shown, with searches, that searches tend to happen more often to non-white people than white people, and tend to find stuff less when searching non-whites than whites. So I'm wondering what the department is doing to kind of address that, and maybe that's part of the implicit bias or other things that you're doing there.
Yeah, originally it's part of the implicit bias training we started several years ago, just recognizing that we all have biases as people. And that is some of the background information that we've asked Hamlin to look into to see how we can flesh out that sort of information and work towards lessening the disparity as we go in the future. Anything else? Okay.
Just backing up on the data, just when you asked about that, I just want to say that if you were able to do a napkin-like analysis in the time that we had to talk, I'm guessing you have access to some more sophisticated looks at this data, and I would just say encourage you to go there.
I just have a couple of thoughts on this point. First of all, thank you for doing this. I think this is an important step towards accountability and transparency, and so keep going. I would echo the same comments of people earlier, that I would like to see more percentages and a deeper dive into the data. But I think you're collecting mostly the right data. The one thing that you might want to consider, and I know Minneapolis struggled with the technical capability to do this, but to collect more than just a gender binary, and to collect information to reflect gender nonconforming individuals. And that is something, it's hard when you've only got so many data points, but I would recommend that as well.
It's hard when you have to rely on the observation of the officer to write it down.
One of the things talked at our table was just data that would be good would be the percentage of stops that get warnings versus get tickets, and the percentages of stops by race that get warnings versus getting tickets. And then the officer-to-officer breakdown would be good for you. I don't think that should be released to the public, but should be definitely. It sounds like you guys are doing that, so that's great. And then just the guidelines on when you give a warning and when you don't give a warning. It feels like it's kind of a spin the wheel of fortune kind of thing for us, as we're out there. That we hope that we get that as opposed to, but at our table, I think that feeling that it's more likely that I would probably get a warning than, say, my friend here.
For traffic stops, does it include people that are walking or bicycling or anything? Is it just cars, mobile? Okay.
Correct, just traffic stops.
Just motor vehicles.
Motor vehicles, okay, because you could have a traffic stop with a person walking, right?
We would call it a pedestrian stop, we would call it something else, but not a traffic stop.
Okay.
And there was some talk in the committee on moving forward, you know, if that's an option. Again, it comes back to some of the limitations with the system. A traffic stop was just an easy category because it's very clear what it is. But there is conversations with the committee moving forward on if we could, if that data would be collected, but it would have to be agreed upon by everyone in Ramsey County, so it makes it a little bit more challenging.
Oh, I can't hear it. I just want to go back to how it was worded saying, is this the right data? I think this is such a complex, multi-layered, it's not one individual person that's going to be able to figure this out. It's teams, it's several different areas, several counties trying to figure this out as a nation. So I feel labeling it as, is this the right data? That's just something that I don't think can be said. I absolutely echoing basically everyone else. This is a wonderful thing. We're moving forward. I don't think we're at the right data because I don't know if that will ever, if certain data will ever be classified as the right data because times change, technologies change, ways of going about this change, but I definitely think we're on the right step towards figuring out data that is going to help in the future.
I think that this data is great that it's being collected, but I think it's also important to call out the places and the reasons why you can't compare things together. For example, census data is self-reported, and you know, I can identify myself as you know, something, and then the data that you're collecting is the officer is looking at that. I mean, so it's really hard to compare that data, and if we were going to do the right thing, we would call that out as, here's a reason why this comparison might be really weak.
Okay, the second part of that sentence I think we've answered in the sense of will the data that is collected allow for meaningful analysis. I think we've got some suggestions of analysis that hopefully have been captured on your green sheets, and we can roll that up and perhaps at a later date make it available to City Council so that they can use it for their purposes in overseeing the department. Number 3, over the past several years, the Roseville Police Department has increased their outreach to the community to ensure all citizens that the police department can be trusted to provide protective services to every citizen. These include Police Citizen Academy, Police Explorers, Coffee with a Cop, Family Night Out, athletic events with cultural groups, and other activities. Do you have any suggestions for additional ways the department can improve its A, cross-cultural police/citizen interactions, and B, its ability to self-correct?
I think the Police Citizens Academy, I attended that along with Janice, who's one of my former neighbors, and I think that by attending that Police Citizen Academy, it sets you up for this presentation in a little bit of a different mindset because you've gone through what a traffic stop looks like, that intuition that they go up and they casually greet the person, trying to lower the stress. I came at this presentation, I feel, in a more open mindset after going to that Police Citizens Academy. So somehow there are many more people here than there were at that Police Citizens Academy. So I feel somehow getting that out there because I think all these little pieces together just make everything more cohesive and much more understandable and figuring out where to go from there.
When doing outreach work, it's really important to invite people to come to your spaces, which I think you've got a number of those, and I think that's lovely. And I'd just like to see on this list all of the times when you're getting yourself invited to people of color's spaces. Meaning, are you going where they feel at home? Because you're going to have a very different, very different dynamic inviting people to come here. And you're also only going to get the people who are willing to invest and do the work when they're the folks who've been wronged. So I would just encourage you to think about outreach to folks where they're at and being outside of your comfort level and doing the work to say, this is our work to do, not your work to do for us.
Some of that is captured into what Lieutenant Adams talked about, our focus of activities, of officers in between calls for service for the first, I'm just going to say 5 minutes because that's a way to accumulate time. First 5 minutes after you get a chance to clear your calls, your first obligation is a community-oriented event. That's interacting with the community members at their location, at their restaurant, at their house, at their bus stop, at their. And that's reflected with a COE, which is a case number. And we've also done a lot of work with Grace Church, especially down at Rice and Larpenteur with Woodbridge Court, with the Corinne community. That's a bigger community-oriented event. The second 5 minutes that officers will have, then they're supposed to be working on traffic. And then the extra 5 minutes that they got, then that's working on hot spots and things like that. But for the last 5 years that I've been chief, the first priority of us in between calls for service is a positive community engagement with the citizens in their world, not in ours. So it's a lot of little things, but I think when you make small ripples of change, tsunamis happen afterwards. Right? All right. She's heard that before.
I just wanted to say that I've experienced a lot of those efforts in the community. I've been very impressed with the police efforts in the Karen community and the other immigrants that are moving into Southeast Roseville, and it's in their area that they're doing it. We've had a neighborhood watch in our community for over 25 years, and every time we have a meeting, the police are in our neighborhood, talking to us, talking about our issues, educating us. I've been to the police academy. I was very impressed with that. So yeah, I just can't say enough about what you do to engage with the community. Thank you.
I just wanted to verify that I thought I heard something correctly earlier or not. Did you say that the officers, when they're on duty, are given territories, districts that they are supposed to be in during that time?
Yep.
And then the city's divided up for that purpose?
Yes.
Okay. So when we talk about the COEs, is the same officer in the same district over and over again, or do they get randomized by their assignments?
Well, we have 4 different patrol crews, 2 day crews and 2 night crews. So Roseville is one big rectangle, so we ingeniously made it into 4 rectangles many, many years ago. So that same rectangle in the northeast is the 2 area. So 4 different officers are assigned to that. So you could have 4 different officers in your neighborhood for a 24-hour period. Plus we have backup officers. We'll have anywhere from, like Joe talked about, a minimum of 4 cars on, and we could have up to 8 or 9. So those extra cars, if you're going up to 8 officers, we have 4 backup cars. They're spread throughout the city. So they more focus on the east side, they focus on the west side. So you could have 6 different officers stopping into your neighborhood in a 24-hour period doing the community-oriented events and doing traffic and doing other things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just was wondering if like the same officers in the same area over and over so that they get known, or do we just get a chance to know all the officers because they all get reassigned to the areas?
Yep, and this is pretty much throughout suburban law enforcement in the United States, even some of the inner cities too, is so officers know what's normal in that neighborhood, because you already do. They get a chance to see, oh, that car is always here at 4 in the morning because that person drives for Pioneer Press, so we don't worry about it. It's not a burglar, it's a Pioneer Press delivery guy. So that works out really well too, and get to know the neighbors, neighbor get to know them. That's the idea too.
So there, okay.
One more. You get to close it out.
Hi, my name is Rick Sanders, and I feel that what you're doing is in the right direction. I think it may be a little premature to take all these numbers and ask some of these questions at this time because the numbers are just coming in. So my hope is that we continue to collect these numbers and they're open to the public so that we can see, and maybe we will see a change or we will see some direction of what's going on within our police department. As far as, to sum it up, as far as how do I feel secure in living in Roseville with our police department, but I still have that fear that I will be stopped more than some of the other people in this room. Hopefully I won't. That's why I have her drive most of the time. But I think the information is coming in at the right time, and we just need to use it in the right way. And I think with using the Hamlin and some of the other schools that you're using, we'll get some answers. And I just commend you on that.
Thank you all very much for participating. Please be sure to document your concerns, your questions, your issues, your observations. We'll roll them up and have a basis upon which to move forward. Thank you to Jason, our city council person, or your city council person. I feel like he's ours because I'm here so much. But thank you for attending. And Mayor, if you want to say the closing prayer.
Well, can I get, as long as the mayor's going to close it out.
Yeah.
So just remember the ride-alongs. Joe Adams is going to be over there waiting to schedule those. If the dates that are highlighted don't work out for you, then pencil in a date or a time that will work better. We would appreciate that. And the next Coffee with the Cop is, the brochure is the Saturday. Well, when you get my newsletter, and the end of the week, you're going to find out the date, but it's on a Saturday in April, so I forget what it is. But that's a sign. 7th of April, 10 in the morning to 11:30 in the morning at Byerly's at C and Snelling. You can ask any questions that you want of any of the cops that are there. Sorry, I'm going to miss that one, but the other people will be there. Plus, you want to talk to more people than just me. But I do want to echo the ride-alongs. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Well, I want to thank you all again for being here tonight and asking a lot of good questions. And I think one of the keys that was a takeaway for me in looking at the data when I first saw it, being reported from the Ramsey County information at the city's website, was that it's a picture of a situation, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And I think we all sort of come into looking at data from our own biases and points of view. And I think we all need to take a step back and figure out what we're really seeing and what we don't know about this information and what we ought to try to figure out better, because I think it can certainly be, and there's no question that people of color have a higher percentage of traffic stops than population in a number of ways you might analyze it, and that's something we have to acknowledge. I think the big question is the why behind the why, and some of it can be biased. There's no question that exists. I think some of it can also be some societal issues that we need to figure out in a much broader sense. And so I think this helps us to start some of those thought processes and those conversations in the community. And so I would just encourage everybody to continue those efforts going forward. Certainly that is a commitment that the city has from the point of view of what we're doing. And then just also in terms of Imagine Roseville and where we go from here, we have asked our Community Engagement and Human Rights Commission to look at the format and the organization and the planning and topics for conversations. And so certainly in the first 5 events, we've had a lot of sort of law enforcement based conversations, and I think that's been dictated by a lot of things that are sort of outside of our control. But there aren't just law enforcement related issues related to race and diversity in our community and how we interact with each other and how the city does its business and how businesses in the community do their business. And so there are a lot of topics that I think we still need to talk about, and that's one of the things that we've asked our commission to look at in terms of going forward and how we have these conversations and what we talk about. So certainly in terms of feedback that we as a city will be looking for is any thoughts that any of you have also about areas or issues of concern that we should be talking about as part of this effort as well. So thank you again for being here, and I won't keep you any longer from the rest of your evening, but wanted to make sure to acknowledge how great it was that you're all here and part of this effort. And please stay engaged and involved.
Keys, if anybody is missing keys, they were left on the table over there. Are they?
They're either yours or mine.
I apologize for the public shaming. But
no, let me look.
They're mine.